All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 44 today. We're going to be discussing cave art with Bernie Taylor. What's up, Bernie? How are you?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.
No problem. It's our pleasure. So I just got done reading your book, Before Orion, which actually I thought it was a great book. I didn't know what to expect going into it. But from reading it and just stuff I've been studying and stuff, I think that there's a lot of cool aspects of it that you point out that is kind of not what you would see from more of a mainstream, if you will. People are just so reductionist these days, they don't have the imagination to go back and go over stuff. But why don't you talk about how you got into that the realm of looking at cave art and the background behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my work is really the alternative to the alternative, but it's on like the edge of the mainstream. So my first two presentations were at Oregon State, another at Hawaii Astronomical Institute. But as well, I give presentations, podcasts to a wide range of audiences, ranging from psychology to spirituality, archaeology, history, astronomy, a lot of astronomy. And so there's, as far as I can tell, there's nobody else that does what I do, but the closest person to do is Joseph Campbell. That would clearly be the closest person. So how did I get into this place of cave art and looking into our distant past and ultimately really who we are today? Is there was a previous book, and the book was titled Biological Time. And Biological Time was an exploration of how animals and plants are timed. And so I live in the Pacific Northwest. We have a lot of salmon. Actually, some years we have a lot of salmon, some years we don't. And some years the salmon come earlier, and some years the salmon come later. And there was always a question why they did it, because whether or not the rivers were high or low, the salmon, there's no connection between the two. And so I asked that question to better understand the salmon. And I found out the answer. And the answer was that the salmon are both timed to the sun and the moon. They're timed to light and dark cycles. And so a salmon will migrate during the darker nights, and they'll slow down at the lighter nights. So on the full moon, they kind of stop, muddle around. And around the new moon, they just cruise through the systems. And the cycle of the moon is 29.5 days. 12 times 29.5 is 11 days short of 365. So they're out of sync with each other. So a new moon migration might be January 12th one year. It'll be January 1st the next year. And that's why the migrations of salmon are earlier or later from one year to the next. And as well as migrating waterfowl and invertebrates and rivers, it's across the biological spectrum. And I give presentations at the scientific audiences, wrote some peer-reviewed stuff, gave a lot of presentations to Boy Scouts and archaeologists and the tribes. And that's the link. So when I was speaking to the tribes, they said to me, you've got to better understand our work. And I looked at their cave art, and someone sent me to look at cave art, images of cave art in France from 17,000 years ago. And lo and behold, the exact same way that the Native Americans were timing the migrations of animals is depicted in the cave art in France from 17,000 years ago at a place called Lascaux. And what's really cool about these images is when you look at the animals themselves, which is really important, you'll find that the artist depicted them at certain times of the year. So he'll have, for example, a deer in rutting condition with big antlers, and a deer will be blowing out steam, and the head is arched. That deer is in the rut. So, and there's other deer, or actually they'll depict horses that are pregnant, and pregnant horses typically is May, June for the females, or at least they drop their young in May, June. And so the artist would depict their world at that time. And I said to myself, when I wrote After Biological Time and gave all these presentations, I was pretty far ahead of where biology was at the time, much less archaeology and so on. So I said, I'm going to put this on the shelf for 10 years and then come back to it when sort of things have caught up. And people did catch up on the biology side in those 10 years. And the concepts of using salmon timing became a standard in salmon wildlife and hatchery management. So it's like mainstream now. So what was a totally whacked out idea for a while was people now use it to save and make money. Okay, which is okay. It's something that the Indians had. I gave a presentation to what's called the Northwest Power Council. So I think these are all the big gurus of power in the Columbia Basin. So these are people who run the big dams. These are the managers, the scientists. And at the end of the presentation, the leader of this said to me, the Indians had it all along. And the truth is they had it in their culture, they had it in their art, but they didn't have it in like a verbal way of saying, this is how it is. It's the moon's out of sync with the sun. They didn't do it that way. They had it in their traditions. And so when we look back in time, we have to look at how people lived not how they how should I say, struggled and how they made do. These people lived at the top of their game. They made incredibly beautiful art. And when I pitched this program, I threw out the idea of why do monsters live in caves? Which is Hercules goes into the cave and he meets the three-headed dog and he fights with the dog. The Sphinx came out of a cave. The Cerberus, the centaur of Hercules, lives in a cave. And the dragon lives in the cave, right? It's a thing. So where does this all come from? Because it has to come from someplace. And so when you guys are ready, I'll pick up the first slide. And
yeah, we'll pick it up. So do you think that has anything to do with like light deprivation and our circadian rhythm? Because I mean, sometimes I don't know if you meditate, I meditate. When you're in a dark room and you close your eyes, visuals do start to appear.
So the answer is that what your experience is a true experience, and many people have it. I just don't think it has anything to do with the creation of cave art. And so as we go through this presentation of the monsters, we can kind of get into that concept of where do the monsters come from? Because the monsters were real in the minds of the cave artists and in the ancient Greeks who borrowed from them. But let's figure out really how real they are and how they became monsters.
All right, why don't you pull up your presentation and I'll load it up here.
Some interesting stuff. I'm very intrigued.
Oh yeah, this is how we looking?
You're good. You're good to go.
Looking good, baby.
So in my book Before Orion, I actually talk about a few caves, but the primary one that I do in presentations, because I have all the images prepared, is this gallery of discs in El Castillo Cave, 34,000 years ago. And this is the northern part of Spain, near Altamira, near the Altamira Cave, or the city of Bilbao. And this is the Cantabria region. And this dates to about 34,000 years ago. Red discs stream across this page. Of course, the image is about 10 meters across, or about 30 feet. And this image is one of the iconic image of Paleolithic cave art. Many, many millions of people have seen this image. It's beautiful. And those red discs just, bring you in. And archaeologists, anthropologists have studied every one of those discs. And they're about the size of the palm of your hand. And there's 90 or so in total. It depends how you figure out which one's a disc or not, because there's different shapes. And they came to the conclusion that this is all about the red disc, but we can't figure out what the red discs mean. And they kind of walked away from the panel from there.
What did they use to create the color? Like, what is the red?
Red ochre. So we're talking so a natural substance, mineral substance. Well, if we can actually learn a little bit from this panel and where these monsters come from the teacher and his apprentice in this cave. And we can see the red disc form the eyes of the apprentice, the smaller head. And you can see his nose and his mouth is slightly open. His eyes are in absolute amazement. And you can see that the older man with the dark hair, and he's speaking to the ear of the apprentice. He's telling him something. And maybe he's telling him about monsters. So this image that you're seeing now hadn't been seen by the many millions of people.
So you got to click on the second slide or click on the screen, because we're just still seeing the main red.
Now you see it?
No. Hold on here. Did you click on the second slide?
I'm on the second slide.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not. Hold on a second here. Yeah, I don't know why it's not pulling it up on your let me see here.
I'd have to go through slide by slide to do it. Actually, going in and out.
Okay. I I mean, I know what you're talking about. Obviously, I read your book with The Apprentice.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot of slides. So how do we?
So just pull up each one, and then we'll present to each one specifically through that. I don't know why that's not
Okay,
working.
we'll try it this way.
That should work, but I don't know.
Maybe it's just capturing the initial image, and then he can't.
That's what it's doing, is capturing.
Yeah, that's why. I don't know why that does that, though. It shouldn't do that.
Okay, that's right. We'll figure this out. And screen share. So I'm gonna I'll go in and out of the slides. Share. You see it, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Nice, the teacher and the apprentice.
Yep. Got it.
Okay, so we'll go in. I'll go in and out. So in this image, we can see this apprentice with his wide red eyes, which from the discs, and you can see this teacher who's speaking to his ear, and he's telling him something. What is he telling him? Well, we're going to learn through that, but I believe it has to do with the monsters, as we would say today. But we're going to. But on the shoulder of that teacher.
Oh, that works.
Yeah, whatever you're doing now is working switching between them. So
okay, so you see now this. You see that. Do you see this?
Yeah.
The eagle.
Yep.
Okay, so on the shoulder of that teacher is a fledgling eagle. It's a fledgling golden eagle, and we can tell he's fledgling means he hasn't flown yet. But the down that's on his flanks. So the artist is telling us a specific time and place. Just as I mentioned before, that they would show the deer in rutting condition. Well, they're showing this bird on the shoulder of the man. Stands about a foot high, hasn't flown. So this is the early June time period. It just goes back to sort of my biological clock stuff. So everything is very exact.
So now, are all these carved? Like these are for sure carvings into the rock? Like they know that these are carved?
Well, prior to my work, there was no identification of anything except red discs. People have since gone back and they've looked at this. And you can see the same. And I didn't take the photographs. And they're taken by Spanish.
But I was just curious: is there tool markings or how?
Thus far, no one has gone back to actually figure out how the whole thing was done. Only that it's there.
Gotcha. I mean, there's clearly shapes. I'm not disputing that at all.
Yeah, it's
I just didn't know if it was something that was naturally like that, which would be amazing in itself, or if there was somebody chiseling these into them.
Well, it's done multiple ways, and one way was engraving, sort of chiseling. Other ways, there's organic matter at the top, organic and mineral matter at the top, and he scraped that away. He also did black shadowing in different places. So it's a very complex image that was done in many different ways. And as we go through this panel, there's other characters, such as we find this elephant with its trunk down. And we find again an elephant now with the trunk up and the ear up.
I think that's the most clear one from what I was reading in your book.
Yeah, most people say it's the elephant in the room. And if you look at they're actually the same elephant. And so if you rotate it 90 degrees, you'll in your head you'll see that the artist created two elephants from one, and two different emotional positions of the elephant. This is an alerted one with the trunk up, and the other with the trunk down is drinking, perhaps from water. And so the artist is giving us multiple perspectives. We can put them side by side and see that.
Yeah, definitely.
So this artist
is
genius, is absolute genius. In the same way that he put the eagle on the shoulder of the man that creates the hairline of the man, he creates multiple perspectives from the same characters, and that is really important. And we do this sort of stuff in our modern time. Here's a test that's been on the internet. It's kind of an embedded image test. And when you guys look at this, what do you see?
An elephant with a donkey, with a dog, with a cat.
Good. That's actually pretty good. And it's some people will look at that and they will see 20 animals at one time.
Wow.
Okay.
Damn.
And because we're all wired differently. And the people that see all the animals at one time have what's called local processing bias. And this Paleolithic artist probably had that same ability, that he could see the details and that things just popped out. I showed this gallery of disc image from the cave to people when I was writing the book, and most people sort of elephant pretty quick, but one or two people, every animal that I ultimately found by the end, they had seen in one shot. It just jumped out to them because we're wired differently. And I believe that this gallery of disc test was a test, as well as other images, to see if the apprentices could kind of have the concept of seeing multiple perspectives.
How does this relate to pareidolia? Do you know what that is?
So pareidolia is really important. What pareidolia is, when you look at the clouds and you see a rabbit or you see an elephant or a horse, your mind has created that. And we, as human beings, we uniquely have pareidolia because it gives us the ability to create art. And Picasso had a feeling about that. We're going to hit that in a few slides later. Okay. But yes, it's our imagination of pareidolia that helps us to take that next step in creating art. And this is actually embedded image tests that psychologists use. And the faster that you can find those little images at the top and the bottom is your speed of local process bias, that you can find embedded images. And that person I said, 2 people that had this gallery disc, everything popped out at once, would have done this test in seconds.
Yeah.
Whereas most people would take a few minutes because they have to reason it through. And we have these sort of tests in our modern art. This one's by Bev Doolittle, and she puts that red fox right down the middle to draw your attention. Have you guys ever seen this before?
No, but I see that's the first thing I saw when you pulled it up.
Yeah, so she's drawing your attention. So what do you guys feel about this?
Now I'm starting to see birds all over the place. I don't know if I'm hallucinating or what, man. It's
I would say it looks like a fox on like a rock cliff or something like that.
Okay. So Bev is playing with your mind in the same way the gallery disc artist did by putting those red discs. There's actually 2 Native Americans on horses.
Yeah, I knew I saw something. There they are.
And you can see there are, and they blend into the snow.
Yeah.
And the trees.
That's bad.
So we do this in our modern time. When we were kids, we used to go to the diner, and the flip side of the kids' menu, they had these sort of tests. You had to find all the animals.
Right, I remember that.
And some people pass them more easily than others. And I believe these are, in fact, the test of being able to have multiple perspectives. And David Baum, the astrophysicist, said the ability to perceive or think differently is more important than the knowledge gained. So you just learned that there's 2 horses, there's two riders, and the fox in that previous image. How important was that in itself was meaningless. But what you did learn is that your eye was drawn first to the red fox, and then you learned about the Native Americans and the horse. Therefore, you yourself, we're not, there's no such thing as a perfect person. We're all wired differently. We all have different perspectives and abilities. And that's what David Baum is talking about. And as we go back to this gallery of this image, we can learn there's so many more characters on this panel. We have the speckled mare. And when I first went to looked at this image, the gallery of discs, I was looking for a horse, and I was looking for a pregnant mare, because the most common animal in Paleolithic art is a pregnant mare. So I was out there looking for it, but it took me 2.5 years to find it when I first started looking. The first animals I saw were the elephants. They sort of jumped out. But as a concept, I was going through this. Every few days, I'd see something different or a unique perspectives. And after like about 6 months, I just, said, there's so much more to learn. There's obviously apparent that this is an endless image to learn about. In fact, there was an animal that I pulled out the other day that I hadn't previously seen. And I haven't drawn it up and put in slideshows, but I will later. And we go on that same panel, we have this cosmic man. He's wearing a mask, and it's obviously a male. And one leg is obvious, and the other one is fairly unclear. And his left hand, which is against the wall, has a feathered appearance. And the right side of his mask has the beak of an eagle, the beak of a golden eagle. And his right hand, he holds an egg, a big egg. And this is, so when we look at this, someone might say, a child might say, oh my God, it's not a superhero, but it's a monster, right?
Right.
Yeah, this half man, this half bird that's coming out of the rocks. And of course, we find him in a cave. Pretty cool.
So in terms of that, then where would they have gotten that idea from? In terms of, you say cosmic man, so that I would assume star traveler. I mean, some people might say alien or whatever, but in reality, where would they have gotten the idea for that?
So I name this person the cosmic man, but the cosmic man is a worldwide phenomenon of the person who transcends into the stars. And so this person actually is a constellation. We're gonna pull in a bunch of them more later, and you'll see how they kind of work out.
Okay.
But and next, so if we put the man who's behind the horse, we find the man is integrated with the horse. He becomes a centaur. Okay. So in the Greek tradition, and we find, of course, Hercules is Chiron is the teacher of Hercules, and so that in modern times we would say that the centaur is a monster. I mean, there's no question about it. Half man, half beast. So this man has transformed himself. This man into the horse. He's become one and the same. And the artist did that by overlapping the characters. And that's just how he did it. It's quite brilliant. So there were never centaurs, but the artist found in his myth, this hero, this person goes on his journey, and he harnesses first the ability or the strength of the golden eagle, gives him vision from the sky. And then he merges with the horse to give the strength of a running animal and perhaps leaping as well. So we've seen two monsters thus far that are in the tradition. And let's find another one, sort of. Well, that man we saw before with the mask is to my left, so-called cosmic man. And you can see the beak on the side of his face, and you can see his chin, and he shows one eye which is to my right. And next to him is the teacher, the man who had the eagle on his shoulder. If you rotate them 90 degrees, one is the other. So the teacher that was telling that story to the apprentice is talking about transformation, about all the possibilities, all that can be imagined. And in that story, he himself transforms into this cosmic man by putting on the mask, by becoming the avian, the teacher. And the teacher goes on this journey as the avianoid, who becomes one with the horse and so forth. He embodies the myth itself. So now we found the monsters. This is the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That there's multiple personalities with all of us if we allow them to come forth.
Yeah, that's what we'd call duality.
It's duality, exactly. And we can find this transformation in this next image, in this man who puts on the mask to become that avianoid. And the rear left hand of this character is also the feathered hand that we saw in the cosmic man that was against the wall. And in his right hand holds the egg, just as we saw at the cosmic man. And so is the monster in this duality, when we transform into the other being, these people did not believe that some beings hatched as a bird and became an avianoid. They did not believe that the centaurs actually existed. What they believed is that people could bring on the spirits of the animals. They could take their form. And by putting on the mask, by becoming one with the other. And we do that in yoga today. In yoga, we transform into the lion and the snake and the crocodile and so forth. In our movements, we summon the spirits of the animals. And the tradition, when they do it, we don't really think of it that way, but that's really what's going on. We're drawing the strength of those animals. And if we go back and look at that cosmic man, we can see that again, his right hand he holds the egg, and that left hand is the feathered arm against the wall, which we found in this previous slide. So this artist is talking about multiple perspectives, and he's taking us on this journey, not just of the person who travels across land, but it's a journey in our minds that we ourselves have to step back and say, is this even possible? And if it is possible, where does it take us as a people? But we're seeing monsters in our past, and all these monsters we're finding on the wall of a cave.
So what about the elephant, though? Because, I mean, I'm just trying to think. Younger Dryas, before the Younger Dryas, there was land bridges. All of Europe was connected.
The straighter broad. So this is an image of the north of Spain, and that elephant is an African elephant, based on its taxonomy. The elephants, they couldn't. There was not a bridge across the Strait of Gibraltar. They would have had the only land bridge is to walk all the way around.
Okay.
They had to walk. It's either you swam across the Strait of Gibraltar to find the elephant, or you had to walk around the Mediterranean.
Gotcha.
And what the artist tells us is that he was familiar with the marine environment. He shows us this spinning dolphin. It's either more than one dolphin or it's spinning. And I need to put a slides comparison someday, because you can actually, when a dolphin is spinning, all these appendages pop out.
I mean, that looks pretty good. That looks like one of the better
dolphin.
ones. Yeah, that looks like a pretty obvious dolphin shape.
And I really struggled when I recognized pretty quick that when you find those holes, engraved holes in the wall, that was the eye of one or more animals. But this one, I really struggled with, because the mouth wasn't right for any animal that I could imagine, because I couldn't get out of my head that there could be a marine environment. And what this image is actually depicting is that the artist traveled across water. And when he travels across water, he becomes one with the dolphin. So that man we saw before holding the egg with the rear, his arm in the back that was feathered, he merges in this panel with the dolphin to become this therianthrope, the merman, or we would think today is a mermaid, but in this theme it's a merman. But again, so if someone said there's merman swimming around beaches, the first word that comes out is really monster, right? Okay. Monsters are attacking, but in the mind of the Paleolithic artist who made this, that there's a myth, there's a story of the hero that takes on the strength of these animals. He summons their spirits, and they help him on his way.
Well, I know that there's instances where they think that the Cyclops myth came from them finding woolly mammoth skulls, since it's got the one ocular cutout in the front of the skull. So I mean, I could definitely buy that. Obviously some of these myths come from obviously some sort of physical representation.
Cyclops is a good one. That's a good one. We've gone back to the cosmic man. Do you see it?
Yeah.
How many eyes does he have?
Yeah.
And in the story of Odysseus, the Cyclops throws rocks at his ship. So many people, the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, Phoenicians, Egyptians, and others, had been to these caves, but different people at different time had been to them. And from each one, they brought away their own interpretation, their own story. And in this one, I would say this guy is the origin of the Cyclops. And in the Homeric version of Ulysses, he's throwing the rock. The one-eyed man is throwing the rock at the people in the water.
So your hypothesis is that all of those stories came from just this one cave, or do you think it's multiple caves? Or
well, there's multiple caves and there's multiple so there's multiple caves that have images, and some of the images are actually the same characters, the same themes, but each when you go into the cave, you look at an image like this, the first thing that pops out is some sort of monster. So when the archetype is encountered, the story is evoked. Where you take that story, whether or not he's holding an egg or he's throwing a rock, is your own imagination. But we do recognize that this being is something beyond, our ordinary form.
Gotcha.
And so people I can trace many stories throughout the Mediterranean into the Sahara based on this gallery of discs. But I can also find other ones among Nordic people that tie into other images. So here's an interesting one. So most of these images you've seen so far are actually constellations, and that cosmic man is Hercules. And we go around. Aegea is the constellation. Aegea is the eagle. Pegasus is the horse, and the eagle man actually overlaps with the horse and makes the horse winged. So it becomes the winged Pegasus. And the dolphin becomes Pisces, going around the constellations. They're all in the same order. And Aquarius would be the man who overlaps with the fish. Well, in this one, we have a monk seal. Well, monk seal is not a monster, but it is in the position of Cetus, the so-called sea monster. And the Greeks probably wanted to come up with a better story than the man encountered a seal, as they say he encountered a sea monster. And if you came across a seal in the night on the beach and it started making its noise, Bigfoot wouldn't jump to your mind, but perhaps, a sea monster would. And a sea monster is a much better story than a seal. But we're going through the constellations now as we travel on our journey, and they're all in the same order as the Greeks had them. And the Babylonians had Hercules and Orion in their zodiac. And so the next character we find as we go around this panel, this red-haired man who holds the club, is in fact Orion. and he has slain one of these animals because he has the pelt, the draped red pelt around his neck, and he has red hair too, which is kind of interesting. So this guy is astronomically to the south, whereas the Cosmic Man Hercules character is astronomically to the north.
And were these aligned with the processional equinox for the timing 34,000 years ago?
Good question, because we're going to step back 1 second on this processional equinox and what is it really all about? So the zodiacal constellations we can see now go back to Paleolithic times, but the zodiac itself goes back to the Greeks and the Babylonians, in that they had a certain number of constellations that, as they appeared on the horizon, the eastern horizon, it told them the time of year. And then if there's a 27,000-year cycle, that those same zodiacal constellations, as they appear looking east at the vernal equinox, they will be a certain timing within that 27-year cycle. Okay, and so do I believe that these people had any idea of processional cycles? Absolutely not. And it's certainly not processional equinoxes, because earlier I'd mentioned that this the eagle on top of the man's shoulder is a June time period. Well, that would be close to the summer solstice when it'd be equinox. So someone believed that everything had to do with the processional equinox to try to time this panel. They'd be trying to time a summer solstice panel off of the vernal equinox, and they'd be off for maybe 7,000 or 8,000 years. Now,
so you think that they were just aware of these constellations, but they weren't at advance yet to figure out the
Like, so you can have constellations without precession of the equinoxes.
Right.
And that's really important. And so there are many images of constellations among Native Americans and in Europe in their art. And they're at the time of year in that place where so I earlier mentioned that we had the rutting deer in the Lascaux cave on a panel. Well, if he had put the constellations on that panel, which some people, there's actually a movie about that same panel. It's called The Hall of the Bulls. Actually, the movie is called The First Astronomers, and it was made by a woman named Chantal, who showed that she demonstrated that same panel was a fall scene with all the constellations.
Yeah, so I think I've seen you present that, where it's the astronomical alignment in that cave with the Taurus and all that.
Correct. So she overlaps the constellations over the animals, and whether or not it's here nor there. She presents a pretty good case, and you can watch the movie is on YouTube. You can find it or streamed on Curiosity Stream.
Isn't there another documentary on Netflix too about the Lascaux caves with the two guys having? I don't know if they figured something out or.
Oh, there's actually one on the Altamira Cave.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah, and we're going to hit some Altamira images later, and that was a Werner Herzog video. And they actually don't figure out anything. They're just telling about their spiritual experience, listening. Sure. Yeah, exactly. Right. So we have this red-haired man, and he's, maybe he's fighting off a monster. Maybe he's killed the monster because he has the club and he has the reward or the prize around his neck. And at the top, above that red-haired man, on the top of the panel, we have two lions. And the lioness has that blockhead, and she's licking the lion at the top. And he has a blockhead, but he also has that the mane seems to stream going backwards. So the back of his head seems to stream going backwards at the appearance of a mane. And in Europe at that time, there were lions, but they didn't have manes, whereas African lions do. And so we have this. But what we don't see is the lion attacking the man. We see the lioness cuddling up to the lion. Perhaps she's licking his food. She's waking him up in the morning. She's come back from a hunt, and she's just saying hi. It's what lions do. If you guys have cats, they come up and do this stuff all the time. Okay? Yeah. It's a cat thing. But again, as we're going through this panel, where these all could be monsters, but they all could be ferocious beasts. But the artist doesn't see it that way. He draws strength from them on his journey. And it's a really important concept. And there's another one that I don't do in the other presentations you might not have seen, is this large carnivore. And this is a mythical animal. This carnivore does not exist. It's a carnivore based on the shape of its mouth. and he has that long red tail, and he sits like a cheetah, but it's not a cheetah, because there actually are cheetahs in this image that it's very succinct, the characteristics of the cheetah. He knows the difference. This isn't a cheetah. So this is some sort of mythical animal, some combination of things. And when I first saw this, I said, I know that face from somewhere. And
It looks like a Pokemon to me.
well, we've all seen the face before.
Yeah,
It's the Giza Sphinx.
Yeah.
It's the blood, and the nemes on the Giza Sphinx is that feature on the back of his head, which is the head, part of the head of the elephant that we saw earlier.
But that's under the assumption that that's the face that was originally there. If you look at the proportions of the Sphinx and how much of a work of art it is, I think everybody is in agreement that the proportions would be, for such a masterpiece of work, the proportions are off. So it was either carved down at some point, maybe from a jackal, maybe from.
So I don't agree with that. And let's explain why. We'll go back a slide. I don't agree with that, because what we see here is we have here the lion, the huge lion that goes across the panel. Okay.
Right.
And this large carnivore actually intersects with the lion. Okay. And so the lion's head would be going forward, whereas this head goes up. And so we're bringing new information to the conversation. So what I believe happened is that the ancient Egyptians had been to this, or they had knowledge of people had been to this panel. And they put two images together, just as the same as we took the man and the dolphin, and the person, the human, and the cosmic man and the avian to become the avianoid, and as well as he merged with the horse to become the centaur. So it's a therianthrope. It's a combination of two different objects that don't exist in the real world. Actually, the lions do, but
well, let me ask you too, because there's a theory that the Sphinx was actually a lion's face before too, and it was facing, when it was carved, it was facing the during the Processional Equinox, which the Egyptians did know about. It was facing Leo constellation.
Exactly, and I've heard that. And so now we can look back 34,000 years ago and find that, in fact, that's not correct. It's an interesting idea, but it just isn't correct, because we can see that the origin of the Sphinx's head, you can see the tear marks at the top of the head, or you can see the nemes, you can see that square face, and he's connected to the lion. And so it's not an exact replica, but it's like 90%. And so the Egyptians that have been to this, or their predecessors, they walked away from it and they came up with a new being, and they stylized it a little bit more like a human being. In the same way that the ancient Greeks stylized the man who overlaps with the horse to become the centaur. So we can see that. So back to the monsters, aren't we? Of course, the Sphinx lived in a cave. The Sphinx did not live on the Giza plateau. So it's a representation of what was in the mind of man in their myth, in their story. And so one of the things that John Anthony West was quite brilliant. And when he went back to the literature, and he said his mentor, it was in print, was Schwaller. And Schwaller said that if you count back all the dynasties, or all the dynasties that are on these tablets, you go back 36,000 years. That's what Schwaller said. And so John Anthony West didn't buy into the whole procession of the equinox thing. He said, this isn't 11,000, 12,000 years. If we're going to go by the story that the Greeks told us, so we're not going to pick and choose, we've got to be talking 36,000 years ago. Because that's the chronological record of these dynasties among the Egyptians.
So you think that the Sphinx was carved then, or you think that the idea was conceived then? Because I mean, I know that there's back and forth with a lot of the different Egyptologists, and I mean, most of them are fringe, because academia thinks it's like a cut and dry case. But if you look at what the arguments are, I mean, I know Dr. Robert Schoch has examined the Sphinx a lot and concludes that there is weathering. At some point, water had gotten around the base of the Sphinx, and it's pretty clear, anybody that's looked at it. Main Egyptologists say that it's wind erosion. I don't necessarily agree with that, because it doesn't show the same pattern. But in terms of
So I have no argument which
yeah.
So I believe so I'm okay with the, you know, between the 8 and 12,000 years of water erosion on the Sphinx. I have no issue with that. What I believe happened is that the people who carved it and then retouched it later, because they retouched this face, they had seen, or they had knowledge of this gallery of disc image.
Gotcha.
So whether it was 5,000 years or 8,000 or 12 or whatever it was, they had knowledge of this. And the knowledge goes back in that record to 36,000 years ago, as Schwaller talks about and John Anthony West had kind of put out there, that so they had a record, and the record went back for a deep period of time, and the record wasn't a processional record. They actually had
it's a list of kings that
it was the list of kings, exactly. Yeah. And so it existed. The record's there, and John Anthony, God rest his soul, was correct. But this is the source. One, it was actually made and retouched many times, I'm sure. I have no opinion on. But there's a few of the characteristics that are quite interesting. One is clearly the nemes that we find in the back of this character. We have that square jaw, and then we have that tear mark at the top of his head, which is apparent in both. But it's a mythical creature, and the ancient Egyptians, they touched it up a little bit, and which is,
pretty cool.
You got to make it look like a monster, but you don't want to make it too monstrous.
Right.
This is a crocodile. It's a West African crocodile. And when I wrote the book, I saw the head and but I just never figured out the rest of the body. I let it go. But recently I worked on it again. I came up with the tail and how it works. And it works so again, we have a crocodile in the cave, but astronomically, as we go around this whole thing, before we found Orion, and then we found the lion. The lion becomes Leo, and next going around the sky becomes Ursa Major, which is not here. I didn't have it today, but there's images of the bears. But then the next one going along the line is Draco. And so the origin of Draco as the dragon was a crocodile, because they found it from this image. And why they came up with, they knew what crocodiles were, but why do you have a dragon instead of a crocodile? I'm not really sure. One possibility is that the legs, I believe this is actually a swimming crocodile. And because it's swimming, you can't actually see the legs. And when Draco is depicted in the night sky, it's depicted without legs, the constellation Draco. So one possibility is that,
just the mouth coming out of the water.
It's coming out of the water. Yeah, it's coming out of the water. And it's or half submerged in the water or something like that. And so here we are. We have another monster. We have a dragon, which is throughout myth and lore. And we find it in a cave. We find it in the same cave as the Sphinx.
Let me ask you a question. How were these caves? Do they have evidence there was fires in there, or like how were they seen? How dark is this cave?
Good. That's a really good question. There's actually a movie about that, and it's starring Antonio Banderas, and it's called Altamira. Altamira, and he did all this work in Altamira. One of his workers discovered it, and he brought in an illustrator, and they showed how the art was made and so on. And then the skeptics came in, and they said, well, there's no soot marks on the ceiling. Therefore, Celtic artists could not have done this because they didn't have candles. I'm sure they didn't have lights as we have them today.
Right.
And so he was discredited based on that one thing. But then in the movie, as it goes, he's in this kitchen with the cooks, and they're burning bone marrow, which doesn't give off soot.
Gotcha.
Okay. And so most likely they were using bone marrow, because we don't find the soot marks on the ceiling or around these caves, and it's preserved as it is. If these images took some time to make, and if there were fires or just candles as we have them, it would have been a mess. But here again, we find another monster. We're cruising that we found centaurs, the avianoid, we found the Sphinx.
Do you think where I was going with that is the flicker of a flame could even highlight some of these images?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The contour and everything.
What he probably did is, so in the early slides, we found the teacher talking into the mouth of the apprentice. What he probably did is he probably walked from the viewer's right to the left with a candle, and took him on that journey.
Gotcha.
And each animal that he was presented with, he learned about that, and he didn't see the rest of it. But absolutely. So how I'm pretty sure that this is a crocodile is that the next slide we have a striped reptile, which is under the tail of the crocodile. And so it's not a ferocious crocodile that's fighting with the hero. It's a crocodile that's protecting its young. Okay, so that's important. So throughout this panel, some of the images we've seen, and many others, there's a relationship actually between the mother and the mother animal and the juvenile. There's a giraffe who protects her young. There's a Iberian lynx who protects her young. And so what we're finding is the empathetic scene. We're not finding a story of monsters that are emerging from the caves and attacking man. And in the Greek traditions, the centaur was the helper of Hercules. And of course, Hercules ultimately does kill centaurs in the cave, but he's drunk, and that's part of the story. And we talked. Let's go to Altamira. Take a look for a second. So Altamira Cave is in the same neck of the woods as the El Castillo Cave, and it was one of the first big caves found. And Picasso was brought in to say, is this a fake? How is it done, and so forth. When Picasso emerged from looking at it, he says, none of us could have done anything like this. This is far beyond our imagination. Well, Picasso was quite clever. Not only did he make that determination that we can't do this, but he actually borrowed images from the cave. And he borrowed these two images, these irregularities in the rock from Altamira that have charcoal marks on them, and he put them on his first Cubism work, which is also considered the first work of modern art, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He puts them on the masks of the women, these women of the street, these women of the brothels, these prostitutes. And these masks are depicted kind of the shape of mares, horses. So he puts them on top of he creates masks. So he connects the Paleolithic to create the modern. So modern art itself is not a new creation. And people said when they first saw Les Dames d'Avignon, this is monstrous. But it's really Picasso's borrowing a metaphor from the past. But we still have this theme of monsters that when we look at movies and listen to stories that have these strange creatures, we have to realize that the animist, the animal within us, that goes back to a very distant time. We had a connection with these animal beings, and that we learned from them. We drew strength from them. They were not harming us. Of course, once in a while, I'm sure a lion took away a baby, but the norm was that the people were watching the animals, observing and learning from them. In the same way, this Picasso now borrows from this Altamira image, and this is the same place that the question of why, how come this no stood in the cave, and they ultimately resolved it with the bone fat marrow.
Right.
And famous image. And prior to my work, it was always assumed that the masks were African masks, and you'll find it everywhere that there is, except my work. You'll find that it's a presumption of African masks, including the movie that this series that came out last spring on Picasso, a National Geographic channel, which is of course
I didn't
starred
see that,
by Antonio Banderas.
Of course, dude. Of course, man.
Antonio
all over the place,
Antonio and Benicio really cornering the market.
I didn't even know Antonio's was in to art. What the fuck's going on with this guy?
So he was. So the really interesting part of this is that there's a connection between this Picasso and his role in Altamira as he becomes the amateur archaeologist. Is that Picasso borrowed from Altamira, the cave that he actually discovered. And if the Picasso series or the Altamira movie had made that connection, it would kind of been a lot more interesting. But they did. My work didn't come out until after those.
Are you familiar with the most recent find in Borneo that says it's 40,000 plus, the cave art?
Yeah, and that's so that's actually an interesting point, because how did this 34,000 a year came up in this cave? And what this is a limestone panel, and carbon calcite secretes from the limestone, and you can date that using a uranium testing technique. And so the calcium carbonate when it goes over the art, you can say that the art is older than the dated calcium carbonate. And so how they're coming up with these dates is they're saying that is the minimum. That's the minimum age. Gotcha. So this image, I'm saying, is at least 34,000 years ago. In fact, it could be 100,000 years ago, but it's not. Okay. Right. And the one in Borneo could be 10,000 years older. So it's really saying that's the minimum age for them. I believe that the first art didn't come from Borneo. It didn't come from Europe. It came from Africa.
Gotcha.
And that's really came from.
We had an interesting guest on Bruce Fenton, where he wrote a book called Into Africa. Where
I read it. Good book.
He hypothesizes that life came out of Australia and worked its way up from Sundaland up the, when there was the land bridge there before the Younger Dryas, worked its way up into Indonesia and up through Europe and then down into Africa. So the timelines there to me don't seem too off from that hypothesis, but I mean, it's for me, it's one of those things where I don't see enough either way. I mean, I think the most people would agree life started in Africa, but I think the Australian aspect is definitely an interesting aspect with the cave paintings they have too, the Wajiji and the dream dancing and all the stuff that the ancient stuff that they still, and it was an oral tradition, which I think is far more, what do you want to call it? Reliable than, the passing on of, writing and different things.
Yeah. Bruce is a bright guy. I read his book and I respect his work. My sense though, is there's actually a lot of moving around, and where people actually came from is unclear. And we think that people moved, from, one forest to another over many generations, but really in the Sahara today, the Tuareg will travel over 1,000 miles a year on foot, and they're as nomads. So people probably did a lot more travel in the past than we could imagine. And there's a lot of gaps in the DNA. But I really respect his work, and he's on to something. And I believe that what will ultimately come out of his work is that he's showing the mixing of people from different places and so forth. And so we can go to this next slide. We actually find another monster, another Picasso monster. And this is the Picasso image is from a curtain he made for a play, and we can see that avianoid character with the big chest, and the beak of the bird is not an eagle and it's not a vulture. It's some mix between the two. And of course, the Birdman is carrying a monitor, and I'm totally unsure what going on with the other character.
I mean, that one's clearly a monster. Of all the ones you showed me, that one looks like some sort of half bird, half man, half
absolutely
like penguin.
Yeah, the penguin.
Oh,
or it looks like it's got like a toucan bill or something.
So where did Picasso get it from? Well, he got it from Grotte Père Nanterre in France from about 25,000 years ago. And what we're looking at in that image is we have the same big chest. We see those big gangly hands, and that he also shows those feet that were kind of not exactly how those should be. But on the top of his head, we see the mask that comes off, and so it's a some shamanic type character who's wearing the mask. He transforms into the avianoid. And so we find this character, this avianoid character, throughout Paleolithic Europe in the caves. And in each cave he's in, he's a different bird. In this one, he's a bearded vulture.
So do you think he was just traveling around to different caves looking for inspiration?
Oh, absolutely. Of course he was.
Yeah. I mean, that is pretty close, that one right there.
Oh, it's damn close. And within that, what you can't see so readily within that image is there's a horse within the cave art image that Picasso used as the central character in his Guernica. And he actually drew he pulled a few different characters from this image. Now, Picasso was onto something, and Picasso was very bright. And you asked about Parody Lia before. Well, Picasso said, I'm going to quote him on this one, "It occurred to man to create his own images. It's because he discovered them in the world around him, almost formed or already within his grasp. He saw them in a bone, in the irregular surfaces of cavern walls. In a piece of wood, one form might suggest a woman, another a bison." So Picasso is talking about Parody Lia. He saw that in a cave wall, there was a slight outline of a horse, and the Paleolithic artist then filled out the body and the legs. And if you look at the clouds, you'll see bunnies and all these sort of things. Well, so art comes from Parody Lia, and we found that same Parody Lia in the cave walls and the wood and the bone, and we brought the spirits forth from them. We summoned the animals from those objects, because in the animist mind, who these people were, they're all spirits. The stars are spirits, the plants are spirits, the river are spirits, and as well as a piece of a cavern wall or a piece of wood. They're all spirits. So they're summoning the animals from the spirits. And so that kind of pulls back to that whole day of Parody Lia and where does this all come from? And Picasso figured this out because he looked into the caves, and he himself took these characters as the two masks in Altamira, and he took them forth and transformed them into the two women in the brothels in Europe.
Gotcha.
And so you would ask early on, you would ask the question prior to the show about hallucinogenic drugs, and
right.
So in terms of how people use ayahuasca now and magic mushrooms and all these sort of things, I actually have no opinion on. It's just not my thing. And
well, let's be real here. They're definitely used as a sort of party drug. But to give you, I don't know if you've listened to any other episodes, to give you an idea, I think they're a powerful tool. I had severe OCD, CBT therapy, pills, let me down for years. And I have to figure something else out. Lo and behold, I had a history from when I was younger in high school and college and stuff with psilocybin mushrooms. Couple experiences on those, and boom, I'm back in the game. I feel great. There's, it does something. It like resets your mind or does something. But as a musician as well, I can tell you these substances do have an impact on art in a significant way. And that's my opinion on it. I know everybody's opinion differs, but from somebody that's done it, that's familiar with art, that produces their own art, there's a reason why you see rock stars. And I mean, even look at the Beatles, the most clean cut band ever. What did they create after they used psychedelic drugs for the first time? Sgt. Pepper's, greatest album of the Beatles, in my opinion. So, I mean, I just think that there's something to that. And what I was talking to you about before was in the El Castillo cave with the red discs. I think you're right what you were describing, that you don't think that those are Amanita muscaria, which was hypothesized by Graham Hancock on his band TED Talk. And I agree with you there. I don't think that that's Amanita muscaria. There's no white marks on them. There's no white stem. Who knows? Maybe they didn't have a white color. Maybe it just wasn't that aspect of it. But there is other cave art that does depict mushrooms, and I can pull it up if you want.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. So the Graham Hancock, when we pull the slides in front of us, has his so-called Warren consciousness.
Right.
And we can see the Peshmeral from about 25,000 years ago, and you saw the red disc. So that is much later than the Gallery of Discs. So if in the Gallery of Discs we find all these red discs the artist uses them to create other characters, and no one's eating red discs. They're just has nothing to do with magic mushrooms. And so I don't believe that cave art has anything to do, that the first art of man had anything to do with magic mushrooms. I believe
those aren't, just so you know too, those aren't necessarily your typical psilocybin or psilocybe type mushrooms.
Yeah.
Amanita muscaria is a very specific type of mushrooms that's more considered a hypnotic.
It's not even a pleasant trip, is it?
Yeah, it's active ingredients, muscimol, what they've tried to synthesize into making a sleep aid medicine. People do hallucinate. It's been widely used by the Siberian shamanic tribes. What they do is the reindeers love them too, so they dig them up underneath the snow in Siberia. They eat them, and then the shaman drink their urine and hallucinate, because it's something about how it's metabolized is what activates the hallucinogenic properties of it.
And that's a good conversation to have with Graham Hancock.
Oh no,
We'd love to have it.
Yeah,
We would love to have it.
If he could come on the show, obviously that would be great.
Get him on the show. Reach out. You guys get him on the show and have him defend his band Warren consciousness.
Right.
Because it just isn't. But I'm with Picasso that the first art of man, we first found it, we saw it in the rocks. It was Parody Lia, and we brought it forth. We brought the spirits forth. And in the clouds and the bone and the wood. That's how I see it is coming. It had nothing to do with hallucinogenic drugs and
right.
So, but that doesn't mean, I've been injured in the past and I took, some sort of opiates, right? And so it doesn't mean that hallucinogenic drugs have no value in society. I am not that person.
Right. You're just saying it doesn't have a bearing on the first
anything to do with consciousness,
art.
symbolic behavior, or the foundation of consciousness, symbolic behavior, or cave art. That's my thing.
There is a hypothesis, though. I don't know if you're aware of it. Is the doubling of the brain size occurred? Food of the Gods from Terence McKenna.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah,
they were flipping cow patties over, and I'm the image I'm going to bring up right now.
Yeah, but you're not out the stoned ape theory, man.
Yeah, he's talking flipping cow patties, which is the Neolithic.
Right.
So we were conscious before the Neolithic, and we were probably conscious millions of years ago.
Well, let me ask you, if that's the case, then how come you don't see the stick figures and the people till later on? Why is it a lot of animals early on as opposed to people then, if we were so in tuned and conscious?
Oh, actually, so in this, well, the images that you've seen today of people are actually now the oldest images by about 10,000 years that we have in Paleolithic art. So I kind of brought that forth.
Gotcha.
Okay. And there's many other images of people out there. Why do they have all these animals? Well, in this particular one, as the hero goes on his journey, he takes on the spirits of the animal. So the animals are just important as the people in this panel. But yeah, so later we have stick figures. There's many different representations of figurative art, in the same way there's different representations of music. And so someone, just tapping a drum, boom, tap, 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 and chanting is its own music, whereas other person, is a little more elaborate.
Right.
So, there's many different styles of art, and no doubt there's many people that have used hallucinogenic substances to make art. No question about that. Art of many different types. I just don't think it has anything to do with the origin of consciousness, symbolic behavior, or cave art, as Hancock.
I'll agree with you that it's not the origin of consciousness, but I do believe it's enhanced consciousness.
Oh yeah, no question. Well, it changes consciousness.
So right here, this is Selva Paslacua in Spain, which is 6,000 years old. You have the bull, and then you've got the mushrooms down here. There's 13 little mushrooms, and like we just said, mushrooms grow on cow patties.
Yeah. So so what's the date of that one?
6,000. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think it has a bearing. Like what you're saying, like the first people probably weren't using hallucinogenic drugs, and if they were, it wasn't visible in their actual art. This I'm saying it's clearly visible there at the bottom. That those are mushrooms. I mean, there's
absolutely. And so and this ties into what Terence McKenna said. He said during the Neolithic, people rounded up cattle, and it was from the dung of the cattle that they found the mushrooms. And so he's saying, McKenna was saying, is that to really have for nomadic people to have the mushrooms, they had to have the cattle living in among them. And
the oldest history I could find is there's a mural in Algeria. They say that's dated between 7 and 9,000 BC that has psilocybe Marar. And it's here. I can pull up the thing, and even the anthropologist says that it's that mushroom because it doesn't have the specific. The way that it was drawn is very close, and I couldn't find a picture of it right now.
My focus is I'm interested in much older time.
Right.
And
no, I mean, look, I like I said, I found your book amazing. I mean, there's not a lot that I guess when I went in, I had an open mind because I didn't know a lot about cave art. I mean, I had an idea, but it goes back to back to the beginning, I guess, is where comes from.
It really does. It goes. We talked to who would be my greatest inspiration. Really, what connects us would be Joseph Campbell. I mean, without any question.
Right.
Because this isn't really about cave art, and it's not really about the animals, and it's about the hero that goes on his journey, and a journey that we all take as individuals, and some people take a great others.
Right.
And so that's really, I really see that as the crux of the whole thing, and not. So I'm going to go to, I'm going to pull myself back.
Okay.
Can you see me?
Well, I
Yeah.
think this is fascinating. And look, I'm not, I wasn't trying to
Yeah.
check you at all. I think these discussions get enhanced when you
Yeah.
have some sort of, mediumship there. Like I said, I love your book. I think you
Yeah.
are definitely onto something. Can you explain? Because I did see you explain the hero's journey. It was almost like a timeline from the El Castillo cave, how you described how the person went through the
Oh,
hero's.
absolutely. You're actually, that's really good. So we find this character, the hero, or the teacher, speaks into the ear of the apprentice, and that teacher goes on a journey. He transforms into the Avenoid, and he travels from northern Spain across down through the Iberian Peninsula, across Strait of Gibraltar into Africa. And in Africa, we find animals like on this panel, like the giraffe and so forth. But he's taking this journey not just on land where he meets these animals, but he's taking them through the night sky as well. So as he goes from north to south and south north again, those are the constellations that he sees in the night sky. So as in the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below, they believed that the earth and the sky were a mirror of the other. Neither is reality. Neither is no more real than the other, I should say. And that, so we talk about, people talk about astrology today, and we look to the heavens for our answers. Well, these ideas are deep into our psyche. They go back for a very distant point in time, at least 34,000 years ago. And this panel that we find, these are fully developed constellations in the same order as the Greeks had them. These people didn't come up with this. It came up from a far distant time, at least tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years before, that people were following the constellations through the seasons and tell them when they should be and what will happen. So in certain times of the year, they'll find animals in point A, and other times they find them in point B, and the constellations reflected that for them. And so this hero goes on his journey. He travels all the way to Africa, and he comes back again. And on the journey, he's learning about himself, and he's facing all his fears. And I believe the climactic moment is when he's holding that club and he's fighting that monster. And the monster that he fights, we're not really sure if is it the deer, is it the lion, is it the Sphinx Carnivore character? It's not it's the seal. I'm pretty sure about that. But he's fighting the monster within himself. And that is the high point of the hero's journey. And when you come to face the monster within yourself, you then find more wholeness, and you come back to tell the story, which returns all the way back again to the beginning of the story. We have to find the teacher speaking to the ear of the apprentice, and so that apprentice, it's a circle. And I believe that all the apprentices in that time period took that journey. It was some sort of rite of passage for the apprentice, because it told them all their myth and their constellations and where all the animals were. It told them where they came from, which is Africa, and a place that they did go back to. About 12,000 years ago, cave art disappears in Europe. Just actually Southern Europe completely disappears. But
You think that's because the Younger Dryas?
So I'm not sure the reason why, but what happens about 12,000 years ago is rock art first emerges in this Greater Sahara. And we find the same animals. We find the elephants, we find the giraffe, we found the hippopotamus. You could walk from actually weeks across the Sahara today, only see sand, and come across a rock wall with an alligator. Okay. So the Sahara 12,000 years ago was expansive lake region, lakes larger than the Great Lakes. And there were crocodiles, hippopotamus, and all these savanna animals there. So what I believe happened is 12,000 years ago, everybody took the journey, and they were pushed out of Europe for, I'm not sure what reason why. It could have been the Younger Dryas, but they were pushed back into Africa, and from there they disseminated throughout the continent, and they disseminated their art. So the Greater Sahara is a large area. Of course, it's larger than the United States, but it is the largest art gallery in the world. And it's full of animals and full of people. And so I believe that these people went back into Western North Africa. And there's a difference in people. If people in West North Africa, Morocco and Algeria, compared to sub-Saharan Africa, they're completely different people. The people in West North Africa are we would describe as Caucasoid, the people that look just like they do in Southern Europe, where sub-Saharan African people are this Africans, the black Africans, we would say. And this is not anything to do with race or who's smart or anything like that. It's nothing to do with that. But so where did these people in West North Africa come from? I believe they came from Southern Europe about 12,000 years ago. So they didn't disappear. They migrated back into Africa. Now, into West North Africa, where they remain, and we can find some of the stories from the Gowrian disc and other images within their own culture. So I'm not sure if you've had any Atlantean scholars on your program, but
we have not. But I mean, I know a lot about. I've researched it. I'm up on all the latest stuff.
So the ancient Greeks had been to these caves, as well as the Romans, Phoenicians, Babylonians, and others, and they would have looked at this and they would have been amazed, because now they had great architecture, but they didn't have these type of images. They're overlapping images, and they would have recognized this was a distant point in time, because there are animals that they didn't recognize either, because the animals had long passed on, become extinct, or not in their part of the world, I should say. And so they would have looked at these images, and they would have said to themselves, this is absolutely amazing. This is a technology beyond our comprehension, that they were incredibly smart people in the past. But what happened to them? They knew they weren't down the road from them, and they knew. So what happened is that they came up with a story. They came up with a pretty darn good story, a story of people that were, that had to be a moral component to it, right? So people that had done badly, they enslaved their neighbors, and the great heroes, the Greeks, fought against them, but they were ultimately destroyed by an earthquake and fires and all these sort of things. But they had to explain among themselves what happened to these great people, what happened to this incredible astronomy and mythology and artwork, that they couldn't redo the artwork. Otherwise, we would see it in their record. We see pieces of it, such as the Sphinx. So I believe that I'm not an Atlantean type, but I believe that there was never a great civilization that had spaceships and and undersea worlds and all these sort of things, but that the ancients saw something from the distant past, couldn't explain where these people were, and therefore it must have been a lost civilization.
Well, I mean, for me, Atlantis isn't what you described either. It's not spaceships and underwater stuff. It's an advanced civilization for its time. I mean, if we look at Göbekli Tepe, what were those hunter-gatherers doing, raising those T-pillars up in such a, and not only that, they were carving away as a relief carving, which you don't really see anywhere else either. So that's pretty interesting. But from the Atlantis, are you familiar with the most recent people out there hypothesis? I think the guy from Ancient Architects and that Jimmy guy from Bright Insight have been pushing the hypothesis for Atlantis, that you know what the Recot structure is in the Sahara, the Eye of the Sahara.
No. Oh, okay. I did see that. Yes.
Okay, so there's a bunch of there's a bunch of concentric circles, and that it's described almost perfectly by the Timaeus and the Critias from Plato's work. But yeah, that's kind of exactly where you're talking about in the Sahara there.
It's the greatest Sahara. And so they came up with a story. And we start off this program today about, why do monsters live in caves?
Right.
But we didn't actually see any monsters, did we? We found characters that the Greeks would have said were monsters, or we today would say are monsters. But we never actually found the monsters. And so I believe that the monsters do live in the caves.
We're the monsters.
The monsters are within ourselves.
We are the monsters.
We are the monsters.
Look at what we do. We kill things. We got zoos. We got all sorts. We slave people. So yeah, I think we are the monsters.
And I think a great example of the story is with Luke Skywalker, and he goes to the Dagobah cave, and he stands out that side. He wants to go in, and Yoda says, "You're not ready." And he says, "Well, I'm going to go in anyway." And then he says, Luke asks, "What do I bring with you?" And Yoda says, "You only bring in yourself," or something like that. But it's probably I mixed up. You got to mix up the verbs and the nouns a little bit. But it's
yeah.
Okay. So Luke goes down to the cave, and he sees Darth Vader, his nemesis, and he battles with Darth and the lightsaber, and he lobs off the helmet of Darth Vader, and he sees his own face within him. And so the monster that is in that cave, and the same caves that we've gone today, is truly the monster in ourselves. Monsters these animal beings in our world, the mythical carnivore, the Sphinx, the lion, the cetus. The seal is not a monster. And the mermaid and so forth.
Could be.
It's a
Could
good
be a
story.
walrus
A
or
monster.
something like, you know.
And but they're really the monsters, the fears within ourselves as we take this journey. But we have to answer the call, as Joseph Campbell would have said. And when we answer the call, we're beginning to face our monsters. And at the climax of our journey, when we come to face ourselves, that we truly are the monster, that it's not all these other things that are out there, then we're ready to come home and tell our story, whether or not people believe it or not.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Well, let me ask you one more thing before we wrap up here. I mean, we can talk more if you want, but just seems like that's a good place to end. But I ask all my guests this: do you believe in some sort of creator, not necessarily like a god, like a dude in the sky, but do you believe that this all means something? Because we are kind of living, breathing magic, and I don't understand the complete reductionist viewpoint on stuff. And I study physics, quantum physics, all that kind of stuff, so I'm up to date with all that kind of stuff, and they're not really all on the same page themselves with all that. So string theory is pretty much outdated at this point. So
good question. So we could have spent weeks just in this gallery of discs and plus some other images. And what we found was all these animals are overlapping with each other. And we find this man holding the egg. And he's holding the cosmic egg, which is the origin of creation in mythology. And that we found among the Dogon, the Vedics, the Norse, the Egyptians, and the Chinese, and the story of the myth of Pengu. He's holding the cosmic egg. And so we have this sense within ourselves that we need to find, there must be a beginning and there must be an end. And so we're searching for that cosmic egg, that beginning. And whether or not the cosmic egg falls from a bird or it's made by a great creator, we're looking to find the answer to one of the two great mysteries, the mystery of where we come from and where we're going to. And there's something within us that it's wired in us to keep doing that. And whether you're a physicist or you're a spiritual type person, we're all seeking that same answer, because it's the search for that answer is what keeps us together. Mm-hmm. It creates the myths that we follow. And around the world, I'm not a Christian, but around the world, the Christians can communicate with each other because they have a common myth. Mm-hmm. And Muslims can communicate with each other. And physicists can communicate because they have this common myth of the Big Bang.
Right.
And there's, of course, many different ideas about the creation of the universe or multiverses. But it's the myths that keep us together. And it's the myths that kept us together for tens of thousands of years, that we have the same myth of this cosmic man, that all these explosion of the universe. But here's the difference between the cosmic egg myth that we hear today and the Big Bang and so forth, is that in this image, there's no singular creation. What's happening is that the egg, the bird drops and hatches the egg every year. And every year the universe explodes and all the constellations come to being. So their world was circular, cyclical. Yep. They had no original creation. But when the ancients went into these caves and they came out with the story, that when this archetypal story, they said that there was this creation, there was this original time and place. And
the
there was
Egyptians
a singularity.
call it septepi.
Yeah, there was a septepi. But in fact, the Paleolithic version is that it's a circle. So every year the bird drops the cosmic egg, and every year it explodes, and every year that the hero goes on his journey. And that was a story that they would have told just before the summer solstice. I
like that answer. That's a good answer, actually.
Yeah, it's an answer that nobody. Actually, Native Americans would have a similar answer. Native Americans, because they're cyclical animals culture.
Sure. And I think that there's something to that too. I mean, you think of what's the infinity symbol? It's pretty much, it's not a circle, but it's circular in the sense that, it's going in the same pattern over and over and over and over and over. So, but yeah, no, I think I liked your book. Let's check out, do you have a website? It's beforeorion.com? Is that what?
Yeah, I can pull it up. Let's pull it up. It's okay. Go to the application window and Can you see the last slide?
No, it's just you still.
Okay, hang on a second.
Okay.
I'm learning how to do this.
No, it's all good. Well, look, we're
all
still,
learned something
we're still
today, baby.
tinkering. We're still tinkering around with stuff ourselves. So.
How are we looking?
Okay, you're
Good.
good now.
So I use before Orion for everything. I hashtag before Orion. Lots of videos. My webpage, beforeorion.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, lots of videos. But the easier place to go is the webpage, beforeorion.com, which becomes a portal to absolutely everything else. And if you're a reader, go for it. If not, that's okay too. There's lots of media out there for people to look at and explore. But it's, we've covered today maybe 5% of the book.
Well, we'll have you back on for sure.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I learned a lot, man.
I learned a lot too. And there's a couple things I don't necessarily agree with, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. Like I liked your book. I thought you had a good hypothesis. I like where you were going with everything. I like how your book, you included the pictures and described things and had A, B, C, D, that kind of a thing going on. I thought you did a really good job structuring it out and telling your story. So I highly recommend your book. We'll have you back on and we'll discuss it more and we'll go into more detail next time.
Oh, there's pictures in it? Maybe I'll read it.
Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Cheers, brother.
Peace.